Let's take a dive into a bit of an obscure sort of definition, below floor. I'm going to also struggle through kind of wrapping my head around what we're talking about because I don't think of things below the floor or below floor. So what SDI is talking about here is below floor, below the top of the concrete or structural slab. Okay, it makes more sense. So, you know, there's no, if you're new to hollow metal, you know, there are just certain things that you bang your head against the wall on. And being painfully truthful, it was 2 years before I understood the difference between left-hand reverse and right hand. But once I got it, I mean, it was, I remember that day. I remember exactly where I was when it became quite obvious to me. Finally, after 2 years, it was thoroughly obvious. So there are things in hollow metal that are just difficult, and the concept of below floor, below the top of the concrete or structural slab, and it is true that we need to talk about what is below floor in the sense that it gives us a term by which to conceptualize what that area is called, because it does pertain to what we're doing. And taking into account those conditions that occur below floor during the construction process is important to us so that we can understand how to arrange our understanding and ultimately our ability to supply correctly hollow metal that works in the given application. And it will become obvious that when you're looking at a sill section on plans, how incredibly important it is to look at that, because taking DHI classes, when you are detailing an opening, they don't tell you in the description what undercut is desired on the job. Distance from the bottom of the door to the bottom of the jamb, or clearance. And sometimes it only shows up in the sill section, and if you miss that, it's a problem, because standard hollow metal will have a 3/4 inch undercut. Bottom of the door to the bottom of the frame. That's all that they're talking about there. And, you know, that would be typically 3/4 inch, but if you look at the sill section, it could easily say 3/8 of an inch. It could say, you know, some other dimension, and it's always a tip-off. If you see 1/4 inch rise saddle thresholds in the hardware set, that's a tip-off to me to look at the sill section, because it's probably not a standard undercut, and it usually isn't. It's a 1/2 inch undercut. So, admittedly, I'm going to probably muddle through this a little clunkily because I've read through this definition and what SDI refers to as a governing document, and much of it made sense. Some of it is a bit clunky, so let's get clunky. Let's do it. If you are enjoying this video, please click thumbs up or like, and also please consider subscribing to our channel. Let's move on to the rest of the video. Okay, here's the SDI definition. Below floor, and what they're saying there is below the top of the concrete or structural slab. And slab is what you're standing on. You know, you're on a job site. All they've done is basic erection and poured concrete. You're now standing in the giant spaces that have no demising walls. Below the top of the concrete or structural slab, so below that. See also jam extension. So let's just see jam extension. Let's do a Control F for jam extension, and there it is. That portion of a jam which extends below the level of the floor. That's a bit tricky right there. That doesn't mean you have a frame that is unusual at all, but they're calling it jam extension. So I've got a frame, 2-inch face, 5/8 stop, forgive me, hole for the bumper, and your door is going to be here. So the dimension from this point to the bottom of the jamb, that's your undercut. But they're saying jam extension. Okay, here's your stop, 5/8 stop, and here's your 2-inch jamb. they're saying that the jamb extension is what goes under the floor. So you could have a concrete pour that the frame sits on top of, but then you've got some flooring, and that's here. So the jamb extension they're referring to is literally the space from the top of the what flooring condition is there, and the bottom of the jamb which extends below the level of the floor. So what they're saying is whatever flooring has been put in here, call it carpet, call it adhesive tile, call it hardwood, from that level, from that surface to the bottom of the jamb, they're calling jamb extension. To me, when I think of extension, I think of something that is added on or in some way elongated or extended to contend with a particular condition. But in this case, the word extension doesn't mean anything to do with extending, elongating, augmenting, adding on to. It just means the part of the jamb that happens to extend below the surface of the finished floor. But it's an integral part of the frame, just a standard frame. So where it starts to get clunky is right here. See below floor. Okay, that's where we came from. For additional information, see the HMMA Tech Note, HMMA 810TN01-03 defining other undercuts. Well, it just so happens I have that document here. So we're going to dive into this right now. If you've not hit subscribe yet, we would very much appreciate if you did, and hopefully you're enjoying this video. Now, let's get back to it. Okay, so let's dive into this glorious document. So one thing that's nice is they begin with a review of established definitions. So this is 2 pages. No big deal. But you may want to, this is on naam.org, NAAMM.org. Let's see if I can locate where this is. Content uploads products. Let's do this. Let's see if we can get real lucky. Let's take that, let's search. It's spinning. Let's open up the Hollow Metal Manufacturers Association and search there. Well, as that's spinning, which is what it's doing, technical publications. So, all right, let's do this. So from the NAM homepage, go to HAMA, Hollow Metal Manufacturers Association, then go to Publications. Defining undercuts right there. Great documents that are here, just phenomenal. All right, so that's where you're going to find the original if you want to follow along with us. Okay, so let's tackle this document. That's how you're going to find it. Review of established definitions. So, actual door height. Okay, well that's pretty easy. Put your tape measure on the door and tell me how tall it is. So, the door opening height minus clearance and undercut. Okay, great. That's a great definition, obviously. What they're telling us here is we've got a frame. I'm not going to draw in the stops. So what is the distance from the underside of the header in the rabbet? So if our frame looks like this, what's the distance from here down to the bottom of the jamb? Okay, so they're saying actual door height is the underside of the header to the bottom of the jamb minus your clearance minus your undercut. Clearance is the area from the underside of the header to the top of the door, from here to here, which is generally 1/8 of an inch, and then undercut is the dimension from the bottom of the door to the bottom of the jamb. That dimension. So 84 minus 1/8 minus 3/4. 84 is the frame height. 1/8 is the clearance. 3/4 is the undercut. 83 and 1/8. Stock typical hollow metal doors are going to be 83 and 1/8 all day long. That's where that comes from here. So they're backing into the definition, and I think from a definition standpoint, it's, you know, the definition for actual door height can't be put your tape measure on the door and tell me how tall it is. Okay? Even though that's what actual door height is. Except that what? Well, except that nothing. I can't come up with any scenario that would violate or cause this definition to not work. You know, top clearance. It's the same as clearance at the bottom. You know, what's the distance from the hard object to the net something? So there you go. Door opening height. That's just going to be the distance measured vertically from the frame head rabbet and the top of the floor or bottom of frame minus jamb extension. So a bit clunky, but let's go through it. The distance measured vertically from the frame head rabbet and the top of the floor. So what that means is, in this scenario, you've got a door here. And let's say your subfloor is here, but then they came in with some hardwood. So this is the hardwood. So the definition is the distance between the frame head rabbet and the top of the floor. And that's your door opening height. So the net amount of what's left over. So without the subfloor being here, and in a perfect standard world, it's 84 inch minus the 1/8 inch minus 3/4. But now the door opening height, they're saying take into account the finished flooring. And in this instance, this area right here becomes the jamb extension between the subfloor and the top of the finished floor. That's your jamb extension. It's not extending. It's always been there. But now you've changed how you think of it when you add finished flooring. And I'll tell you, now that I think of it this way a little bit more, it's a great way to think about it because it forces you to think about what are you doing at the floor and how does that affect ultimately the undercut that you need to have ordered on the door. Or bottom of frame minus jamb extension. So that's just what we said. Frame head to the top of the floor, also known as the bottom of the frame, subtracting the jamb extension. So undercut equal clearance plus jamb extension, or undercut equal clearance plus the thickness of the finished floor. So if that's not baked your noodle yet, let's move on. Finished floor, C floor. Definition 4, floor. The top of the concrete or structural slab. Okay, so I don't have a problem with that. What is the floor? The floor is that surface that you're going to stand on. In my mind, there's a difference between the floor and the finished floor. The floor is going to be whatever rough plywood substructure that's going to be the surface onto which the finished flooring is going to be constructed onto. So in most instances, your hollow metal frame, it's really easy when you think about just a parking garage. What's a parking garage? A lot of poured concrete, right? And some electrical conduits with lighting. there's nothing else. There's some doors, some frames, some stairwells, some handrails. But when you think about a poured concrete structure like that, you're going to take that frame and literally rest it on top of that poured concrete. And that makes it super easy to understand that the dimension from the top of the floor, which in this case is the top of the concrete or structural slab, and the underside of the door is going to be your undercut, because there is no finished floor. So that's the way that I easily grasp that. Now, 5, floor clearance. The distance between the bottom of the door and the top of the material directly below the door. This varies with application such as concrete, any floor covering, and or threshold. So this is the meat and potatoes, what's happening here in terms of understanding what's going on. Meaning, undercut is just simply the dimension from the bottom of the door to the bottom of the jamb. However, clearance is the dimension from the bottom of the door to whatever you are putting here under the door. That could be hardwood, that could be carpet, that could be vinyl tile, that could be just a threshold alone. It could be anything. But when they say floor clearance, I think of just clearance. It's the floor clearance, but I think of it as just the clearance in the sense that I think of, I'm not saying that you should, but I think of undercut, and then I think of clearance. And you always will have an undercut. The dimension from the bottom of the door to the bottom of the frame. Sometimes the clearance is the same dimension, but usually it's not, because there's usually a finished floor condition that exists here. Okay? So, floor clearance, the distance between the bottom of the door and the top of the material directly below the door. This varies with application such as concrete, floor coverings, and or threshold. Very easy. What did you add here after the door and frame are in? Your clearance is the difference between the bottom of the door and the top of whatever you added here. If you added nothing, then it's the same as undercut. In most instances. Well, I think in all instances it really would be. But maybe it's not. And we'll talk about that. Well, let's talk about it now, because I'll probably forget. You could have, there could be a severely out of level flooring condition. Where your floor goes like this. And you've got a frame that's going to sit in here. You've got a good dimension here, but what's going to happen is that your frame's not going to make it all the way down. So what happens in this instance, this is level. Pretend that's level. Well, what are you going to do? You can add an adjustable base anchor. It is also feasible that this jamb leg literally runs longer. Okay? And that's what makes it important to incorporate an understanding of that concept. Any material, floor covering, any material applied on top of the floor that extends under the door in its closed position or under the door as it swings to its fully open position. So, if you've got an application where your door hits something, that could be the latter of the two, where it's something under the door as the door opens, like a rug, which leads me to think a lot about automatic door bottoms, which solve that problem pretty well. But generally, a floor covering is going to be that material that is your finished floor, or something that rests on top of it. And in this case, they really mean something that rests on top of it. Is there a rug that will go through the opening? Is there something that you have to take into consideration when it comes to what you're going to do about the net door height, or therefore the undercover, the undercut vis-a-vis the clearance? So speaking of undercut, the distance between the bottom of the door and the bottom of the frame, simply stated. The formula in which to determine undercut is derived by adding the total sum of the following. It may bake your noodle a little. Floor clearance plus the floor covering thickness, plus the threshold, assuming it's installed on top of the floor covering, plus the jamb extension height. So you've got clearance is the dimension from the underside of the door to the top of whatever the door is above, which could be floor covering, finished floor and or floor covering, plus a threshold height, assuming there's one there may not be, plus your jamb extension height. And that, again, jamb extension height is just the amount of the jamb. Actually, they show it here really well. Here's your floor covering, this line here, but under here is what would be the jamb extension. So undercut is the sum of floor clearance, which is from the bottom of the door to the top of the floor, plus your floor covering thickness, which is this, plus your jamb extension, which happens to be the same, so you don't count it twice. Meaning if you had something else in here, you would then add it. And then again, you know, the amount of the jamb that resides between the poured slab or structural slab and the height of the finished floor. That's undercut. They're backing into it by saying, take everything that could be happening here, add it all together, and that's undercut. Add it all together in the sense of, does it exist? Do you have all of these components? And if you don't have all of them, just add together the ones you have. And that should equal the dimension from the bottom of the door to the bottom of the jamb. And that's easily also understood by what we were saying earlier. Your clearance is, it's not always been 1/8 of an inch. I know that there's a piece of hardware that forces a greater than 1/8 inch clearance, and I don't remember what it is. An overhead concealed closer, an overhead concealed something forces that dimension to get a little fatter, which is problematic. If this is always 1/8 of an inch, and you always know what your nominal height is, let's just say 7/0, you're going to take 7/0 minus 1/8 of an inch, and then you're going to subtract what your undercut is, and that will be your net door height. But if you take your net door height, subtract from 7/0 your net door height, subtract 1/8 of an inch, and that will be your undercut. Jamb extensions. Again, the word extension bothers me, but it's just protruding. It is existing in an area that you can't see. That portion of a jamb or mullion which extends below the level of the floor. It's nothing that's added. It's nothing that's special. It's just there and has been covered by your floor, your finished floor, or your floor covering. Typically, frames are intended to be installed directly on the floor when no floor coverings or thresholds are used. The dimension for undercut is the same as floor clearance. Let me repeat that. Typically, frames are intended to be installed directly on the floor. When no floor coverings or thresholds are used, the dimension for undercut is the same as floor clearance. Yes, it is. Or just clearance. We've discussed that. Okay, let's move on. Back to the top of the page, we got floor clearance, see figure 1. So figure 1, yeah. So floor, bottom of frame, and the floor is the same. Clearance is generally 1/8 of an inch. Actual door height, door opening height. Great. Floor coverings such as carpet, resilient, or ceramic tile are typically installed on top of the floor, fitted around the frame, and under the door. In this situation, the formula for figuring undercut is the total of the floor clearance plus floor covering. So that's it's easy. So they're saying undercut equals the thickness of your finished floor and the dimension from the bottom of the door to the top of the finished floor. Super easy. Figure 2 is what we're looking at there. when a threshold is used is it is installed on top of the floor or floor covering. It would go in this area, fitted around the frame and under the door. Again, the formula for figuring undercut changes. Undercut is the total of the floor clearance plus threshold height plus floor covering thickness. Got it. So if I added a threshold in here, now my undercut's going to equal the clearance, which is the dimension from the bottom of the door to the top of the threshold, the height of the threshold, plus the thickness of the finished flooring. Perfect. And as I go through this, step by step, or maybe even pedantically, I suppose, it reinforces the understanding of having to think about what's really happening here. Because having a door that's too long, as we might say, or too short is a major problem. And if they're fire doors, you can never elegantly solve that problem short of new doors. I have taken lots of calls where customers have said, we've hung the door, but the door literally sits on top of the subfloor. And that's because when they ordered 7.0, the factory sent them 7.0. 84 inch. That's what was sent. They ordered 7.0 tall frames. They ordered doors that were 7.0. They didn't clarify an undercut or what the sill condition was, meaning what's your clearance plus your finished flooring thickness, plus the clearance at the header, which you really wouldn't need to specify. And basically the call is, can you cut these fire doors down for me? That's really what you're getting into. And we're going to take a look at NFPA 80. I'm going to open that up now so I don't forget, because I want to look at that.
What's cylinder type?
NFPA 80. Okay. Great. Now they're showing it to us here. Clearance, threshold thickness, flooring thickness. So a handy graphic to allow you to understand. Threshold, bottom of frame, floor covering, actual door height, door opening height, floor. Great. Awesome. So now, and this has happened, in situations with specialized floors such as thick ceramic tile or terrazzo, the frame is typically installed prior to the installation of the floor. It absolutely is. What happens in those instances is there are jobs that we've done in the past where in the last one, the one I always think of is a grocery store that we did, and there were not very many. In a grocery store, there aren't really that many hollow metal doors in the exterior and common areas, but there were some hollow metal that was installed in an area that needed to be installed prior to the setting of a terrazzo floor that was going everywhere. This was a boutique style grocery store built by a person who wanted it to look a very certain way. So those frames went in first, standard 3/4 undercut, and then they put in terrazzo, and that terrazzo was very thin. It may have been maybe 3/8, don't quote me. But here is a really important thing to consider. What clearance do you want to achieve once the frame is in, the terrazzo is laid, and the door is hanging? In a standard application, where you have a 3/4 undercut and then 3/8 terrazzo, you're going to have 3/8 of an inch clearance, or what they call floor clearance, in this area. Well, that's not what it's looking like. It's actually over here. Is 3/8 enough? And I'm ready to say that's pretty tight, because if that floor is not level at all, you could get to a point where your door doesn't open, and it's a difficult argument to make to your client. Well, your floor is not level. The point of the matter is you want to have a conversation with the architect, the design professional, the person in charge of making that decision. How much breathing room do you want from the bottom of the door to the top of the terrazzo? 3/8 is probably okay, but someone needs to make that decision, and it's never the hollow metal door distributor or manufacturer. The point of this is you have to think about this. So when someone says when someone says I need the frames, and you know that they're putting in a floor after the fact, you need to pull the handbrake and say, will the standard undercut work? Yeah, that's also done because flooring can go in with heated element in the floor as well. Anyway, one method is to install the frame with adjustable floor anchors or for the frame to be installed on a block or shim. Yeah, it makes sense. I was saying earlier the way that you may account for that is to make your door a little bit smaller, shorter in height, increase your clearance dimension. They're saying use an adjustable floor anchor, meaning the adjustable floor anchor, actually in the SDI catalog, I can show you what it looks like, or the glossary, I should say. Here. This is not an adjustable floor anchor, but there are adjustable floor anchors where there is a slot and a machine bolt and nut that you can tailor how far down that floor anchor projects from the bottom of the jamb. Okay, so that's one way to account for that. And then the flooring can run underneath the jamb itself. So we were looking at jamb extension. Okay, so here we are again. Or you put a block or a shim underneath the frame and then you floor up to it. Now I don't see that very often, but the adjustable floor anchor I do see often, and it's also meant to help combat this problem. You put in a floor anchor here because you're not going to order jamb legs that are longer on one side. That seems to be a nightmare because then every one of them has to be measured and every one of them is not going to contour parallel to the floor. So you use an adjustable floor anchor. This allows the frame to be positioned as required to accommodate the floor height, whatever is going on there. Adjustable jamb anchors allows you to remove yourself to a certain extent of how thick that floor is going to be, something that you can't control. See figures 4A and 4B. Yeah. So 4A shows an adjustable jamb anchor. Bottom of frame. Pardon me, adjustable floor anchor, not a jamb anchor. Floor clearance undercut, which is from here to the floor. Okay, so you don't have your jamb extending down below here. You just got a floor anchor, and then that floor is brought in after the fact. The point being is you maintain a standard clearance or undercut, because it's the same here. The problem that you may have, though, is you need to be really mindful in those areas where, well, actually you don't need to be mindful of it in the sense that it will certainly work like this. But ultimately, it's of some concern because if they're adding, if this is the surface on which all frames are set, in areas where you do not have a terrazzo floor, you could very easily see how your head height might be different. May not matter, but it might matter. But be aware of it. That's 4A, 4B is showing the block, something below here that the frame sits on. I would be against using anything that could degrade with time, especially a floor like the grocery store that's going to be constantly mopped. I'm not sure what blocking they would put here. Okay. So another method called, this is new, another method called below floor installation is to install the frame directly on the rough slab. After the frame is installed, the floor is then installed around the frame. That portion of the frame that is covered by the floor is called the jamb extension. That's everything I was just saying initially, when the frame goes in and then they terrazzo up to the frame. Everything below the top of the terrazzo to the subfloor or the poured concrete, the structural floor, that's the jamb extension. The formula for figuring undercut is the total of the floor clearance plus the jamb extension. Yeah, we've gone over that. Clearance plus how far the frame goes below that finished flooring. Okay, 5A and 5B is where it's illustrated. Bottom of frame, floor clearance, floor jam extension below here. Okay. Bottom of frame, floor clearance, floor bottom, the floor that it sits on. Yeah, all they're really showing here possibly is how the two different methods are different. Anyway, finishing this up, Figure 5b, the architect designer must be very specific within specifications and contract drawings, which should include detailed drawings illustrating conditions for each floor. That's called the sill section. That's where they'll get you. Don't miss the sill section. Including thicknesses and materials. These drawings should eliminate the height at which the hollow metal frame, these drawings should designate the height at which the hollow metal frame should be set. Thresholds and hardware items requiring specific floor clearances shall be listed in the hardware schedule. That's really important. If you have vertical rod exit devices, it's really important to know what your sill section, your sill detail looks like. You might be trying to schedule someone might be trying to schedule something that's incompatible with what your hardware requires. But if you have fire doors and you have manual flush bolts, and your governing document says that the penetration of the bolt must be X inches into the strike or the subfloor, that could be a major problem. You're not going to get an adequate amount of penetration of the bolt into the dustproof strike or the threshold or the sill, whatever it is. Knowing all of this up front allows the door and frame manufacturer to properly size each opening. Within the door and frame industry, both HAMA and NAM and SDI publish recommended clearances. In addition, NFPA 80, the standard for fire doors, windows, and other opening protectives, regulates the installation and maintenance of labeled openings and lists several different scenarios consisting of different floor material and the maximum clearance under the bottom of doors. It really does. Let's take a look at it right now. So the way that I best navigate NFPA 80 or 101 for that matter is Control F. So Control F, then the word clearance, and Chapter 9, special purpose horizontal sliding, that doesn't apply. Vertically sliding fire doors, that doesn't apply. Undercutting, trimming the lowest edge of a door panel for clearance. Okay. Clearance. Check it out. Chapter 5, care and maintenance. So NFPA 80 is all about standard for fire doors and other opening protectives. Other opening protectives is a fancy way of saying other things that serve as a fire door, whether it be that old school factory sliding door, sliding structure that is governed by a fusible link, or think of a vertical coiling door that is in a 3 foot by 3 foot opening between a kitchen and a food servicing area. Timbre door, those are fire rated as well. So that was on page 18, which was chapter 5, care and maintenance. And if I recall, chapter 5 is really the meat and potatoes. Here's the important part. The clearance under the bottom of a door shall be a maximum 3/4 inch. And there's a lot more to this. So NFPA 80 is saying you can't have more than 3/4 inch. So if you've got a fire door, they're talking about clearance, not undercut. So that's really important. So you could have a 1 inch undercut. You could have a 1/2 inch threshold and a 1/2 inch clearance. You just can't have more than 3/4 inch clearance. And as you go through the rest of the document and you look at the other instances of the word clearance, you find other interesting things. So also that was chapter 4. Chapter 4 is fire doors and other opening protectives. General requirements is Chapter 4, not Chapter 5. So Chapter 4 says 3/4 inch. When the bottom of the door is more than 38 inch above the finished floor, the maximum clearance shall not exceed 3/8. That is that vertical coiling fire door that I just mentioned. That's not a swinging door generally. How would you get up to more than 38 inch? As you continue to go through, door clearances shall not exceed clearances listed in 4.8.4 and 6.3.17. You want to look at those. Other important stuff, the clearances between the top and the vertical edges of the door and frame and the meeting edges of pairs of doors shall be 1/8 of an inch plus or minus a 1/16 for steel and shall not exceed 1/8 of an inch for wood. Other interesting ideas here. Clearances shall be measured from the pull face of the door. Yeah, so you may want to have a copy of NFPA 80 and 101 if you're actually going to have them to refer to. So that is below floor. So we're on page 5 of the glossary. So below floor. Beveled edge is the next one. Let's move on to beveled edge. Thank you for watching, and if you've enjoyed this video, please click thumbs up, please subscribe, and maybe even send the video to someone that you know. Thank you.